This is Hart Hagen with the Climate Report, and I would like to share with you a course that I will be teaching in June. The name of the course is Healing Our Land and Our Climate, and the subtitle is We Must Heal the Land First. But if we do heal the land first, then that will bring about so many benefits, including benefits in terms of healthier food, healthier waterways, habitat for wildlife, as well as climate benefits. And I will, I will, let me show you this. So the title of the course is Healing Our Land and Our Climate. We could be healing our land so as to heal our climate. We could be healing our land in order to heal our climate. And we must heal our land in order to heal our climate. I will make the case for this. I'm not asking you to believe it just because I say it, but that is the premise of the course. We must heal our land first, and we should want to heal our land first. But what we're doing in recent years is obsessing on climate change at the expense of everything else, environmentally and otherwise. We will not heal our climate unless we heal our land. But if we heal our land, we will heal the climate. We will grow good, nutritious food. We'll create habitat for fish and wildlife, restore our streams and rivers, restore the rainfall and the weather patterns, prevent flooding, prevent drought, and desertification. I'll be talking about this throughout this little presentation here. So, how does the land, let's talk about how does the land affect climate change? Vegetation, and by vegetation I mean all plants. It includes plants in your garden, it includes plants in grasslands, it includes plants in our forests. But vegetation casts shade, that tends to cool things off. Vegetation transpires water. Transpires like perspire. It's emitting water out of the leaves so that it then evaporates. Vegetation transpires water, and as a result of that transpiration, it cools things down. We take advantage of evaporative cooling. Vegetation causes evaporation, condensation, and cloud formation, all of the major aspects of the water cycle before and after rain. In order for rain to occur, there must be evaporation and then condensation and cloud formation. Next, condensation causes heat to radiate back out into space. This is never talked about in the mainstream climate movement. There are scientists like Anastasia Makareva who are talking about this, but it's never talked about in the mainstream climate movement. But when water condenses, there's a certain amount of radiation that comes off from that. Some of that goes back out into space, and it's kind of a safety valve. It's a way to get rid of some of this excess heat. We wouldn't have to do a whole lot of that in order to cool our temperatures down. Next, vegetation makes precipitation more likely. So whether it's the grassland or the forest or a vegetable garden or a crop field, vegetation cools things off and makes it easier for a raindrop to fall. A raindrop starts falling toward the ground. Is it going to make it all the way to the ground? It might not make it all the way to the ground if it's hot and dry, but vegetation makes it cool and moist, making that raindrop more likely to reach all the way to the ground and rain. Next, vegetation cools the air. This is evaporative cooling. When we sweat, the water evaporates and cools down our bodies. When we step out of the pool or the shower or the bath, the water is evaporating. That's why it feels cold, because evaporating water cools the air. We have the power to create microclimates where we are. And if we have enough cool microclimates, then that tends to cool down temperatures globally. Next, vegetation stores vegetation stores water, creating habitat for animals, fungi, and microbes, which create a complete ecosystem. So vegetation stores water, that makes habitat for fungi, animals, and microbes. If you have plants and animals, fungi, and other microbes, then that creates a whole ecosystem which tends to store water and carbon. If we want to get this carbon out of the air, then we should want to absorb that carbon into ecosystems. Water and carbon flow in the same direction. When the ecosystem is being degraded, water and carbon flow out of the ecosystem into the air. When the ecosystem is growing and flourishing and becoming more biologically diverse and growing in biomass, then that creates a situation where more water and carbon is being absorbed out of the atmosphere and stored in that ecosystem. That's what we want. Now, let me share with you a slideshow that I have. Let me get to the right screen here. There we are. Now I'm going to stop the screen and I'm going to start another screen, share another screen. So this presentation is called Healing Our Land. And just to recap like where we are, what I'm doing is I'm sharing a presentation about a course I'm going to be teaching in June, starting in June. I'll be teaching a course, 12-week course called Healing Our Land and Our Climate. It's going to be offered through Biodiversity for a Livable Climate, which is a nonprofit I'm involved in. If you want to check out their website, it's bio4climate.org, bio4climate.org. And here's more about the course. So the course is called Healing Our Land and Our Climate. Part of it, I have two books. There's two books. One of them is Cows Save the Planet, and the other is The Hidden Half of Nature. Let's talk about Cows Save the Planet. Each week we'll be reading a chapter of Cows Save the Planet and a chapter of The Hidden Half of Nature. So Cows Save the Planet, the subtitle is "And Other Improbable Ways of Restoring Soil to Heal the Earth. Unmaking the Deserts, Rethinking Climate Change, Bringing Back Biodiversity, and Restoring Nutrients to Our Food" by my friend Judith D. Schwartz. Now, 7 points here about Cows Save the Planet. Number one is the outrageous title. It is outrageous that cows would be good for the planet, good for the climate, good for the soil. It's simply outrageous if you listen to the half-truths in the mainstream media. But this book takes on that notion, talks about regenerative, planned grazing, regenerative ranching. How do you rotate the animals in such a way as to restore the soil? Because restore the land and the soil, the grasses, and the land, and the wildlife. So, number one, cows can be good for the climate. Number two, restore the soil. How do we restore the soil? Can we restore the soil? How do we restore the soil? Number three, heal the earth. How can we heal the earth? What's that about? What does it look like to heal the earth? I mean, healing the earth is all about solar panels and windmills and electric cars, right? That's what you get when you read the coverage and see the online videos of the mainstream climate movement, because that's about all they're talking about. There's not a serious conversation about how to heal the earth. Number four, unmaking deserts. So can cows and regenerative farming unmake our deserts? our deserts used to be grasslands. Most of them used to be grasslands. Some of them used to be forests. It's a big untold story in climate change. And we need to talk about how do we unmake our deserts? How do we reverse desertification? How do we take sand and turn it into the grassland that it once was? How do we take degraded land, say in Africa or elsewhere, in the western United States, that's degraded land. How do we take degraded land and restore it to what it once was? And that involves animals, because all ecosystems have animals. Number 5, let's rethink climate change. There's a tremendous need to rethink climate change. Number 6, bring back biodiversity. How can we bring back biodiversity? Cattle and sheep and goats have a surprising role to play in bringing back biodiversity. Number 7, how can we restore our nutrients to our food? So those are just a few of the topics covered in Cows Save the Planet. It's a wonderful book. I have read it many, many times. And so let's go to the next slide. What we have today is carbon tunnel vision. The conversation about climate change is all about carbon dioxide. There are so many issues, like you probably can't read this. There are water pollution, air pollution, freshwater scarcity, habitat destruction, biodiversity loss, wildlife loss, species loss, extinction, widespread toxic pollutants, and overpopulation. But we're going to talk about, I don't actually agree with the overpopulation is a complicated and nuanced subject that frequently gets oversimplified, but we're going to ignore all these topics like wildlife and extinction, species loss. We're only going to focus on carbon emissions. So many issues to talk about. Let's only talk about one issue. It's kind of silly and it's kind of frightening. The other book I'm going to be using in my course, Healing Our Climate, or Healing Our Land and Our Climate, is The Hidden Half of Nature by David Montgomery and his wife, Ann Bickley. David is a geologist and is a biologist. So, and what they do, what this book talks about is the process of restoring their home landscape in Seattle, which is something I've done quite a bit of myself. So I have relevant experience, hands-on experience, on-the-ground experience. So they're restoring their home landscape, and in the process, they teach about the invisible life of the soil. The book is called The Hidden Half of Nature because most of the life of the soil is microscopic in nature. It's out of sight, out of mind. For one thing, it's underneath the ground, but it's also microscopic. It's too small to see. And number 5, we're going to talk about the relevance of soil life to human health, which is just David Montgomery and David and Ann both are just some of the most articulate people. They're fantastic teachers. And this book, if you have to learn this subject matter, you want to learn from them because they are masters of the language, masters of their subject matter, truly passionate about their subject matter and passionate about teaching. And what is in the soil food web? What else will we be talking about? What's in the soil food web? What is underground? And why should we want to know about what's underground? Because if we know what's underground, then we are much more likely to appreciate it and nurture it and respect it and help it come into abundance. And so what's in the soil, we'll talk about the root. This image here is from the USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture. And the soil food web, a food web is a collection of food chains. And, when you look at above ground, the birds eat the cat. You know, the caterpillars eat the leaves. The birds eat the caterpillars, and so on through the food chain. So the soil and food chains together constitute a food web. So the soil food web underground is a roiling, riotous party of eating and that kind of thing. So it starts with the plants. It includes bacteria, fungi, nematodes. It includes microarthropods. It includes protozoa, such as your paramecium, your flagellates, and your amoeba. It includes even more nematodes. It includes arthropods, which includes spiders and insects, plus other groups such as centipedes, millipedes, pill bugs, snails, slugs, and then birds get into action, birds and mammals. So that's what's in healthy soil. We want to know what's in healthy soil because this soil food web is the only thing that can deliver nutrients to our food. And this soil food web is the only thing that can turn soil into something that has structure and integrity and pores so that when it rains, it soaks up the rain like a sponge. We want the soil food web to be in action. We want it to be in play. Too often the soil food web has been wiped out. There's very little of the soil food web left in most places, and it shows because that's what gives us flooding, drought, desertification, and bad food. Next, we'll talk about, so we want to be able to critique our food system. We want the awareness that comes from knowing how good soil works, and therefore, what might we be missing from our food system? So this is a picture. This is a picture of a typical grocery store, the produce aisle. This looks very healthy, and it probably is much healthier than many of the other sections of the grocery. But it's not as healthy as you might think, and it's not as healthy as it could be. So item number one here, does our food system give us healthy food? Number two, is our food system good for water or wildlife? Number three, is our food system good for climate? The answer might surprise you, and some of those answers lie in whether we are practicing the principles of soil health. For example, number four, is this food grown with tillage? If it is, that's not good because it's bad for the soil, it's bad for the waterways. Number five, is this food good? Is this food grown with fertilizers? If it is, it's bad for the soil, bad for our waterways, might even be bad for our health insofar as we have to drink the water that is downstream from where this food is grown. Number six, is this grown with pesticides? Chemical toxic pesticides are notoriously bad for human health, bad for the soil, bad for pets, bad for wildlife, bad for children, yet we keep using this stuff. It doesn't make sense. It needs to change. And in order for that to change, we have to rethink how we do food and farming. Number seven, is this food grown with heavy equipment? You know, there's going to be some heavy equipment. In the modern world, most food is going to be grown with some form of heavy equipment. But how heavy is it? How big is it? How expensive is it? How much fossil fuel does that heavy equipment use? We need to be knowledgeable about these things so we can ask these questions, so we can make good decisions for our own health and the health of our family, and also so we can put pressure on our elected representatives to do the right thing instead of the wrong thing. Next, in the course, healing our land, and our climate. So what's this show about, or what's this episode about? It's about a course I will be teaching in June called Healing Our Land and Our Climate. And one of the things we'll be talking about is the benefits of healthy soil. And I've been alluding to this already, but healthy soil prevents flooding, prevents drought, prevents erosion. Healthy soil delivers nutrients to our plants. Healthy soil thereby makes the plants nutritious, makes the plants resilient, and makes the plants resistant to pests and pathogens. And if we have plants that are resistant to pests and pathogens, then we can reduce our use of toxic pesticides. We should all want that because it's very bad for our air, our water, and our food, and for the wildlife. So, next slide. How to make healthy soil: avoid tillage, avoid chemical fertilizers, avoid toxic pesticides, avoid bare soil. You want to cover your soil with something, either living plants or organic matter. Number 5, you want to always have living roots in the ground. And number 6, we want plant diversity. We want a diversity of plants, not just one crop, sometimes called monocrops. And number 7, we want the landscape somehow, some way to include and involve animals. So what's this slide about? This is about all of the ways in which a forest interacts with our water cycles. And if we understand and appreciate how forests interact with our water cycles, then we will want to preserve our forests instead of cutting them down for frivolous purposes. Our forest interacts with water cycles in that it makes evaporation, it causes condensation, it causes cloud formation, it causes precipitation. Our forest becomes a sponge, it becomes a heat bank. And the heat bank means that it regulates temperatures, it keeps things from getting too hot or too cold. Number 7, the forest becomes a cooler. Because of the evaporation, because evaporating water cools the air and the surfaces, the forest becomes a cooler or an air conditioner. Number 8, the forest becomes a humidifier, keeping the soil from drying out. Number 9, the forest becomes an umbrella, shading the ground from the rays of the sun. Number 10, it becomes a windbreak. It slows down the wind so as to avoid excessive evaporation and also avoid winds that are too fast to be safe for humans and our built environment. Number 11, the forest is a biotic pump. It's literally a pump that brings in air from outside because the condensation causes a collapse. The collapse creates a vacuum. The vacuum pulls in air that then condenses and repeats the process. Number 12, the forest becomes a habitat. Most wildlife extinction is a result of the loss of habitat, not because of climate change. So I know I'm giving you a whirlwind tour of this. Let me come up for air. So I know I'm giving you a whirlwind tour of this material, but that's why I want you to join my course, and I'll give you my contact information if you don't have it. So let's keep going with the presentation. There is my contact information, harthagen@gmail.com, if you would like to become part of this course that is coming up in June. So I want to show you something else here, and that is, let me change this, stop screen and then present and then share screen, and I'm going to share the United Nations, what is climate change? So I've been going on and on about this, but one thing that I really want you to understand is that, like, compared to what? everything I've been talking about the value of the land, the value of healthy soil, the value of vegetation, the value of forests, stands in stark contrast to what we hear from the mainstream media. I believe that most of what we hear from the mainstream media is false and misleading, mainly because it is not the whole truth. Not very much of it is strictly wrong, but it's not the whole truth either. In the United States, when you testify in court, you raise your hand and you say, I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. It's the whole truth that trips us up, where the media runs interference from the people that own them. They know who writes their paychecks, and they're not telling you the whole truth. They're telling you true things that are part of a misleading narrative. So let's look at an example of one of those misleading narratives by looking at climate change as delivered by the United Nations. Now, I'm not here to say that the United Nations is a bad institution. They are fundamentally a good institution. They do the best they can. They have their hands tied by powerful interests such as the US government. The United Nations is fundamentally a good institution with good people, but they're like the media. They know who signs their paychecks, and they are unfortunately delivering us a false narrative about climate change because they're not giving us the whole truth. So let's see what the United Nations has to say about this. So it says, what is climate change? And this is what appears whenever you see a YouTube video that relates to climate change. They give you a link to this page. This is the #1 page that comes up in your search results when you search for the term climate change. This is what Google thinks is the most authoritative source about climate change. And of course, don't get me started on how this is, politicians and the media take this and turn it into a partisan game. They accuse people of being climate deniers if you don't believe exactly everything that they say. But anyway, I digress. So what is climate change? Climate change refers to long-term shifts in temperatures and weather patterns. Such shifts can be natural due to changes in the sun's activity or large volcanic eruptions. But since the 1800s, human activities have been the main driver of climate change, primarily due to the burning of fossil fuels like coal, oil, and gas. Now, I don't doubt that the burning of fossil fuels is a major cause of climate change. I strenuously contend with the idea that it's the only cause or the most important cause for us to be dealing with. I also strenuously contend with the idea that climate change is the primary environmental problem. Climate change per se is not the primary environmental problem that we have. Primary environmental problem that concerns me is the extinction of species. I don't have the slide ready, but at some point I'll show you a slide that shows the rapid extinction of species, mammals, birds, fishes, and insects are the 4 groups that together they're nose diving toward the ground. And you can't blame climate change on that because we're talking about what has happened in the last 50 years. So climate change is not the only environmental problem that we should be concerned about. And in my view, it's just a symptom of other things like the unmitigated abuse of the land around us that primarily occurs at the hands of those who have the most money and the most power. But I digress. So it says, since the 1800s, human activities have been the main driver of climate change, primarily due to the burning of fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas. Burning fossil fuels generate, so this is an example of the tunnel vision. They're only going to attribute these problems to greenhouse gases and nothing else. Burning fossil fuels generates greenhouse gas emissions that act like a blanket wrapped around the earth, trapping the sun's heat and raising temperatures. Okay, so what they're talking about here is the greenhouse effect. Greenhouse gases are not the only cause of the greenhouse effect. I can think of at least 2 or 3 other things that cause warming. So the greenhouse effect refers to the fact that there's more incoming heat than there is outgoing heat. It's natural for heat to flow in to the earth from the sun, and it's natural for heat to flow out away from the earth, sometimes because the sun's rays get reflected back out into the atmosphere, maybe by clouds, sometimes because they there's this radiation when up at the cloud layer, when water condenses, there's a certain amount of radiation that makes heat radiate back out. Another thing that matters as to whether there's an excess of heat, excess of incoming heat over outgoing heat, is that what does the sun strike? What the sun hits something when it comes down. All over the earth, it's hitting something. Is it hitting plants? Is it hitting pavement? Is it hitting sand? Is it hitting bare dirt? And if it hit, the best thing is for it to hit plants. And because every plant is a solar-powered air conditioner. The plant takes the energy from the sun, takes it and turns it into, well, the plant grows, so it uses photosynthesis to make sugars, and it also uses those sugars and its nutrients to build itself. And when the plant grows into a full-grown plant, then it's optimally functioning to transpire or to cause water to evaporate. Evaporating water cools the surroundings. So every plant is a solar-powered air conditioner. So when the sun hits the earth, is it hitting a solar-powered air conditioner, or is it hitting a solar-powered hot plate? Sand is a solar-powered hot plate. That's why we should be concerned about desertification, because when things turn into dirt or sand, either one, when an otherwise functioning ecosystem, like a grassland or a forest, turns into dirt or sand, then it turns into a solar-powered hot plate. Do we want the land to be covered with solar-powered hot plates, or do we want the land to be covered with solar-powered air conditioners? Of course, we want the land to be covered with solar-powered air conditioners, and that is a very important aspect of the greenhouse effect. We want to talk about this. The United Nations is not talking about this very much at all. The New York Times, MSNBC, NPR, CNN are not talking about this very much at all. So, but they should. So let's get back to what we were talking about here. We were talking about the United Nations and what they have to say about climate change. So burning fossil fuels generates greenhouse gas emissions that act like a blanket wrapping around the earth, trapping the sun's heat and raising temperatures. Okay, here's something else I wanted to say about that. So when it raises temperatures, that's called the greenhouse effect. And the greenhouse effect is such that there's more incoming heat than outgoing heat. But the excess of incoming heat to outgoing heat is only about 1%. On average, worldwide, here's some numbers for you. On average, worldwide, there are 343 watts per square meter incoming and 340 watts per square meter outgoing. So there's only about 3 watts per square meter incoming over and above the outgoing. If you take a square meter of sand then that's going to have a whole lot more incoming heat than outgoing heat. If you take that square meter of sand and turn it into a square meter covered with plants, then that is going to have, that is going to be such that there's not nearly as much incoming heat, because for one thing, that plant is casting shade. For another thing, that plant is transpiring water. So in that 1 square meter, you can change the ratio of incoming heat to outgoing heat. Isn't that what we really want to do? When you think about it, solar panels are a means to another end. Reducing, which is supposed to be reducing greenhouse gas emissions, which I really seriously question the ability of solar panels or wind turbines to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. That's another conversation, but at best, the solar panel is serves only one function, which is supposedly to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Greenhouse gases are only part of the picture. And another part of the picture is what's on the ground. Is it plants, or is it sand, or is it dirt, or is it pavement? So it says here, the main greenhouse gases that are causing climate change include carbon dioxide and methane. Okay, fine. Still focused on greenhouse gases and not any other aspect of the greenhouse effect. It says these come from using gasoline for driving a car or coal for heating a building, for example. Okay, they're not talking about the greenhouse gases that come from deforestation or from agriculture. I mean, in other words, greenhouse gases come from the land. Carbon, at any given point in time, take a crop field at any given point in time, that crop field is either going to be putting carbon into the atmosphere, or it's going to be bringing carbon out of the atmosphere. It can do either one. Typically, industrial agriculture emits carbon into the atmosphere, whereas regenerative agriculture takes carbon out of the atmosphere and stores it in the ground. It says here, clearing land and cutting down forests can also release carbon dioxide. Well, okay, so they are saying that, but it's kind of a passing comment. Okay, it says agriculture, oil and gas operations are major sources of methane emissions. Okay, methane wears me out. It's tiresome because it's a greenhouse gas, but when they get to talking about methane, they're talking only about greenhouse gases and nothing else. So anyway, I think I'm finished talking about that. The purpose was to show you the mainstream climate change conversation from the single most authoritative source, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change with the United Nations. That's the single most authoritative source for information on climate change. To me, they're telling half-truths because they're not telling you the whole story, and they're not giving you proper context. They're not, a fact out of context is a lie. If greenhouse gases cause warming, yes, but if you're not talking about anything else that causes warming, then it becomes a lie, because it becomes a lie of omission. It's what they omit or what they leave out that really determines whether it is truth or somewhat mendacious. So that's about all I have. I want to leave you with this. Let me see. I'm going to stop the screen, and I'm going to share the screen, the slideshow, and I just wanted to share with you that this is how you get in touch with me if you're interested in the course called Healing Our Land and Our Climate. I'm excited to be able to present this material to you. We're going to have a good time in this course. Biodiversity for a Livable Climate puts on some mighty fine courses. That's all I have for today. Thanks so much for joining me. Have a nice day.